Hi, my name is Rick Goverde. I am here with Helen Clarkson, CEO of Climate Group. She just returned from a trip to Singapore and to China, where she kind of worked with businesses and governments to really dive deep into the transition and see how parts of Asia are driving the transition forward. And Helen, I'd like to talk to you about that. You just were at the Climate Group's Asia Action Summit in Singapore, where we met a lot of businesses, and then you traveled to Asia. Kind of what was your feeling about that? What was the vibe that you got there?
It was a great vibe. So we were at the, as you said, Climate Group Asia Action Summit. It's an annual event we're trying to run, which is very much focused on work happening across Asia. So lots of different geographies we covered. And it's really interesting because there's so much kind of uncertainty in the world at the moment. There's lots of people sort of challenging sustainability, asking if things are going to move forward. And what we really saw there is that businesses are keeping going, and the conversation they want to have is not should we do something, it's how. So in particular, there's a lot of focus on things like the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which the EU is bringing in next year. That's going to affect a lot of export economies, and so understanding how that's going to affect them, what they need to do ahead of that was a real topic of conversation across the day. So lots of kind of practical conversations, a bit of talk about trade going on, as you might expect at the moment. But kind of the dominant conversation was about how do we get on with this and what do we do next.
It sounds quite hopeful, actually. Like I got the feeling very much. I was there as well. That companies really were thinking, like as you say, not if but how, and how we're going to break down those barriers. Did it give you kind of confidence as well? And kind of what was your, I think, main takeaway? If Asia move, what will the implications be for the rest of the world?
Yeah, it definitely is hopeful. I think the thing that I thought about a lot was a lot of this is being driven by EU regulation. So you need to kind of understand that those trade flows, and that trade is going to be critical to this, but also the kind of regulation that's kind of applying to trade in the future. And we're hearing about other countries are going to bring in these border adjustment mechanisms as well. And I think that's going to be really critical because that then sets the frame in which a lot of the export economies are working. What we've heard consistently over the years from businesses is they just need kind of certainty of direction, and they need a level playing field. And so while there's a bit of kind of grumbling about all these things coming in, as long as it affects everyone the same and they know when it's coming and there isn't too much change, it's the uncertainty that makes it really, really hard for businesses to plan. So I think in that sense, it does give you hope that these regulations are coming in, other countries are looking at them, and that's continuing. And then the other piece of it all is how China's thinking about things, and we can talk about that. But they're not really changing direction. We're getting quite clear signals from China about what it wants to do, and you can see obviously other economies in Asia reacting to that as well.
Yeah, so you mentioned China, which is of course a really big player and kind of a direction setter in the world, if you will, on EVs and on solar and on other innovations. What was the kind of the main reason you went there? What were you there to talk about?
So I went to China because we have a team in China. Climate Group has an office there, and they're doing work on steel and energy. They're two big focuses. And in particular on this trip, I was there to talk about some of our work in energy because we've done a lot of work in the last couple of years through our RE100 campaign to align the Chinese energy certificates with RE100 technical standards. And what that means is we've now got that alignment. So we were announcing that. We were doing some meetups as well with the people who've worked on that, the think tanks that work with the Chinese government, sort of bringing that work to a conclusion. But it now means that companies can have confidence that if they buy those certificates in China, then that will meet their RE100 goals, which is really important. And that will allow as well, you can then start growing amount of renewables on the grid more confidently because it's going to get recognised in the certification system.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
a bit technical, but it was a kind of, my job as well as to go and meet everyone and keep everyone kind of confident in going on that. I think what you see in China is, again, there isn't a lot of debate about should we do this. There's a very clear vision that Xi has set out, where he says he wants China to be a technological leader by 2035. So typically, other bits of the world probably have innovated around things, and then China has kind of copied, got things to scale, gone one better. And I think what you're seeing now is this shift into a kind of innovation economy as well. And I think that's really, really interesting. And when you're in China, there's a lot of energy around, again, I went to quite a long event with a lot of the power companies, and they're talking about how they're shifting and how the certification system will allow them to bring on more. So yeah, a lot going on there. There's definitely a pace of change that China has committed to, and it's not sending strong signals that it wants to go faster than that. But what you hear there is them saying, well, look, China sets slightly less ambitious targets but hits them, whereas the EU approach has been set a really ambitious target and maybe miss it a
Just
bit.
missed them.
Yeah, so it is a slightly different kind of cultural approach to it. But I think it is interesting now to see the kind of the drive for innovation, and just even things like when you're getting the equivalent of an Uber, it's pretty much always electric and things like that. So that feels different.
And what do you think, or is your assessment on what the implications of China and other parts of Asia, India is getting in the race as well when it comes to solar, for example? What are the implications for supply chains across the world? Like, how does this kind of impact? Because it's a production hub. It's so much of the products that we use globally come from China or close to it, or other countries in Asia. How does that impact the global supply chains in a positive way?
I think that's quite hard to answer in the light of all the kind of tariff conversations that are happening, because I think that is going to throw a spanner in the works. And someone I met there was saying, well, China's just going to dump everything in India. There's lots of questions about moving things around. So I think that kind of trade climate picture is a bit that's really uncertain, and we'll see sort of playing out. But you can see a commitment to technology from China that's just kind of keeping going and growing. And I think it's been interesting, here in the UK, and I don't know about the rest of Europe, it'd be interesting to find out. But, I feel like a few years ago, no one knew who BYD was, right? You never heard about Chinese cars. And now you hear from, I was speaking to a car dealer actually with them last year, and like, yeah, they're great. This announcement about this battery, which apparently has this enormous range. No one really knows the physics of it. I've heard some queries about, well, surely it's so much heat if you charge it in 5 minutes. So we have to see what is it that they've done to drive that. But seeing just that sort of marker in the sand about, like, we're going to be the economy that does what we've done for solar for these other technologies, I think is interesting. And the next one I think will be hydrogen. Though again, it's hard to see quite how you export hydrogen. So I think there's a lot of questions, but it is true that these things are coming out, and they're sort of putting marks in the sand about where they want to be on this.
Yeah, and with Asia moving forward at a steady or even an increasing pace, if you want, kind of that translate in the rest of the world hopefully moving as well, right? Which kind of the rest of the world automatically brings us to Climate Week NYC for us.
Yeah.
Right? It's in September. It's happening in New York City. What is the key takeaway for Climate Week NYC there? What is the focus for companies and governments there? What are the issues that they want solved? If you look at Asia, what they are kind of dealing with.
Yeah, so for the global companies we work with, they are going to be as driven. So the global companies headquartered in the US, I should say, they are as driven by EU regulation, Asia policy, and so on, as they are by US domestic regulation. So when it comes to Climate Week NYC, that is very much a global event. And so we will be looking at that global picture. Again, I think the conversations that we're hearing from companies they want to have is very much the practical one. So, whether they're working domestically in the US and they want to understand, well, actually, we've made this commitment to EVs, how do I actually get the siting, the permitting to get sort of charging facilities and get those hooked up to renewables. We had that a lot recently in DC, that's a kind of those grid questions, the first and foremost. So very kind of practical. Or whether it's, what are the policy shifts that are happening in Asia? How is that going to affect my supply chain? So some of the questions you were asking earlier is what people want to come and talk about. Yeah. So it's very much keeping that focus in September on the global picture and how things are continuing to move forward, and giving businesses the tools to operate within that.
And what are you hearing from businesses? Are they kind of looking forward to it, to coming, or what is your sense on Climate Week NYC specifically?
I think on Climate Week NYC we are hearing a lot of positive voices. Businesses want to come, they want to be there. We also are talking to governments, bring them along. We want civil society there. So we're hoping to kind of create an event that is as important as it always is. And with COP then coming a few weeks later in Brazil, it's a big COP. It's where a lot of the governments, if they haven't already, need to turn up with their NDCs. And so it's going to be a big moment to continue to give that signal to governments ahead of COP that civil society and what we call non-state actors, so the kind of subnational governments, cities, businesses, civil society is ready to support a more ambitious set of NDCs.
One last thing, if you don't mind, because we launched our strapline for Climate Week NYC, which is Power On. Can you explain a bit about that? Kind of what are we trying to convey there? What are we driving forward?
Yeah, so it was a bit of a pun on power and electricity and renewable, so that sense, but also, again, Climate Week NYC is about bringing together all these different parts of the picture: businesses, governments, financiers, investors, civil society, others, in order to show how that combined power is what's going to lead us to delivering climate action fast.
And we need everyone to power on.
Exactly.
Thanks very much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.